Sea wakes, dark skies, sleepless moonlight. Baby cracks on tired feet, sleep in pride. Voices rise, shadows fall, truth unfurled. In the heartbeat of the city, madness swirls. Echoes bounce off concrete dreams, lost and found. Battles fought in alleyways, revolution sound. Green and gray skyscrapers watch without soul. In the heart of Manila, where stories unfold. Alex and Ivan cried out loudly for truth. Scream for justice like a fever broken youth. Every word's a bullet tearing through the night. In this war of
And we are live from Manila. This is SITREP, the podcast on Philippine affairs and Philippine interests. I'm Ivan at home. With me on the here is my co-host Inform PH. Hello, Alex.
Hey,
Happy-
hi everyone. So tensions rose this week in the West Philippine Sea as at least 8 Philippine Navy sailors were injured after Chinese vessels on Monday sought to drive away their vessels on a rotation and resupply mission to Ayungin Shoal. The troops, including one whose finger got cut off, were wounded during a confrontation with the Chinese forces that rammed and towed the rigid hull inflatable boats as they tried to reach the grounded warship, the BRP Sierra Madre. Chinese troops also seized firearms of the Navy when they boarded one of the inflatable boats. This marks the first time that China boarded a Philippine vessel and conducted a search.
It's truly a drastic escalation, no doubt. And who better to react to this than our guest today, who needs no further introduction? Professor Richard Heydarian is a senior lecturer at the University of the Philippines Asia Center. He is an academic, columnist, author, online commentator, foreign relations analyst, and undoubtedly one of the most prominent public intellectuals in the Philippines today. Professor, it is an honor to have you here on our podcast, sir.
Thank you very much, guys. It's a pleasure to join you guys. Parang,
Yeah.
I don't feel lonely na mas konyo pala kayo sa akin. Sabi ko,
Yes.
mas konyotic to. I
It's
feel less
konyotic,
lonely.
eh?
Thank you.
Of course. It's a different audience on X, sir. It's a different audience.
Yeah.
So, Alex.
Okay, before we start, this is we wanted to start the episode on with a very light question. So we have here the first question. So how is how is your workout routine, and what are your tips to get getting a like a toned physique? So that is the first question. So
Our producer insisted on asking you that, Professor. That's question one.
yes, we wanted to make it light. Yeah.
Is this the launch of my Tristan Tate career?
It's time. It's time.
I'm working on that. Don't worry. That's another project I'm working on. Obviously, I'm not in my 100% shape with all the traveling and airplane food, but as much as possible, sinisigurado ko na all of this just sitting, sedentary work, teaching, writing, and all of that doesn't take too much of a toll, at least in terms of my, my self-image. So, hindi pa ako nandyan, but hopefully later this year, if we get there, definitely we're going to give tips on that. Yeah.
Well, I can't relate to all that tone and buffing up because my physique is as weak and brittle as the Duterte foreign policy. It sways in the wind. So,
Never too late.
I guess, sir. More personal question, sir. You've got now hundreds of thousands of followers on social media, and you've gone we remember you from your early days on doing online work during the heart of the Duterte period. How does it feel, Professor, that you've become such an authoritative voice and public intellectual, if not the public intellectual on geopolitics in this country? Like when people think, it's Richard Heydarian. Of course, we need to listen to Richard Heydarian. How does that feel?
Well, I mean, obviously, besides my great share of haters, including a lot of pretentious public intellectuals and pretentious experts with no relevant publication, I don't think we need to say the name of these people.
Of
Itago
course.
na lang natin sa pangalan na. I'm just kidding. No, no, actually, I started as a blogger in 2012 or 11 on Huffington Post. I don't know if you guys, maybe you're too young, but Huffington
Oh,
Post used to be the cool blog. Kind of like a pretentious parang way of writing na papunta ka na sa New York Times, Washington Post. So actually, I started there, and I was just a junior lecturer sa Ateneo de Manila University. This is just over a decade ago. So that's how I started, quite humbly. And then may mga nasulat tayo na medyo nag-viral, and by 2014 na, Karen Davila, among other people, noticed that, oh, mukhang nasa Pilipinas pala itong tao na to na kung ano nung sinusulat niya sa Huffington Post. And essentially from there, it took off. So I wrote a book on Duterte. That was actually already my third book. I wrote on the Arab uprisings. I wrote on, South China Sea already. Then I wrote a book on Duterte. So the Duterte era were crazy. Obviously, it was very depressing because you're getting death threats, attacks, insults, right and left. And hindi pa naman ako handa. Akala ko pakit lang trabaho ko. Pakit ka sa TV, give some nice analysis, and everything is fine. No, oh my goodness. Parang politiko ka na, di ba? In the middle of a firing zone. And, it took me some time to get my act together. But thank God. And I think my faith became much, much stronger throughout the years because I realized as long as you stand for good convictions, you stand for good principles. Unfortunately, there'll be a lot of people who try to attack you and bring you down. But, you cannot bring a good man down. I'm not saying I'm a good man, but at least I try to be a good man based on my faith and based on what I think is right for my country and what is my duty to the country. So essentially, that's how it took off. And then, of course, as a matter of therapy, I probably wrote 500, 600 articles on Duterte alone. So that puts it at around, 2,000 articles over the past decade or so. So that quite an intense schedule, I must say, in addition to millions of social media posts. But if I were to give an advice, and I usually don't give this kind of advice, but since we started this whole Tristan Tate career, be very active during especially elections or big events. That's where you're going to get noticed. I started as a foreign policy West Philippine Sea guy, 2014, 2015. But I got into domestic politics, and now I have a podcast almost every day. Thank God we're saying analysis. I started that by live tweeting the debates. Ito yung debate ng 2016 ng TV5 One News where I am right now. And that was a debate where I said Grace Po won it if it's a question of merit. So para sa atin mga konyo, I think panalong-panalo siya. But in terms of audience impact, panalong-panalo si Duterte. You could see na pinagtatawanan niya si Monroe. So, pangatlong imo na yan. Yung mga ganun. Kala na yan. Tapos si Lord de Vera pa nandun. I mean, it was hilarious. But that's where we see Duterte so good in terms of audience impact. So, live feed ko yan, and then I wrote articles. And essentially, that's where I also launched my political analyst lifestyle. I hate the term political analyst. I mean, we took political science and everything for a reason. But so sinabay ko yung foreign policy at saka domestic politics kasi there's no way you can understand Philippine foreign policy, especially during the time of Duterte, without understanding domestic politics. So it was that nexus that I look at throughout those years. And essentially, that's where I work it through from. I mean, it was not easy. I also made some wild decisions, including debating some of the DDS vloggers and all of that. Because I'm not scared. I mean, I grew up as a debater, very competitive debater in college for UP Diliman, among others. So I never shied away from debating with anyone, essentially on earth. And thank God, also all writings got attention of many people. As a journalist for GMA Network before that, ABS-CBN, I had the chance to interview Prime Minister Mahathir, meet world leaders. Henry Kissinger, months before he celebrated his 100th birthday, also reached out to a number of experts in the region. And when I say region, the whole Asia and the Indo-Pacific. And I was one of them. So I felt probably ito yung destiny ko to put the Philippines on the map in terms of strategic thinking. We have world-class journalists. We have, world-class nurses, healthcare workers. Ang gusto ko sana mangyari is makilala din tayo mga Pinoy bilang strategic thinkers. Because pagdating sa Southeast Asia, it's all Singaporean. I love my Singaporean friends, but they're not the only ones thinking in this region. So, when Kishore Mahbubani I write something about can Asian think, something like that, well, I'll say like, are Singaporeans the only one who can think in ASEAN? So that is also where I come from. Obviously, I pulled that off kasi medyo makapal ang mukha natin. And, it takes a sense of self-confidence to pull that off. But thank God naman, medyo na-justify naman natin ng konti. Sorry for the long introduction. I know that was supposed to be a light conversation.
No, it's fine, sir. You saw the wave and you wrote it. You rode that wave well, sir.
Pleasure.
Alex.
Okay, so you have hundreds of followers on
No, that's I already asked that, Alex.
you already asked that.
Oh my God,
Okay,
Alex.
Okay, so we're going in for the for the next question. Okay, so going now to the serious stuff. Okay, so and the West Philippine Sea. So Professor, what are your initial reactions to the recent events in the West Philippine Sea? We got soldiers, fingers cut off. We have Philippine vessels boarded. I believe even like weapons confiscated. How worried should we be? Yeah.
Well, actually, nakakabahala pa lang nung panahon na ang China ay gumamit ng mga water cannons na napakalakas. So, tinanong ko so this is for my shot. One, use the view from Manila. You can check it yourself on YouTube. Yung free version, obviously, kung wala kang cable. Commodore Trinidad, the spokesman for the Philippine Navy, I said, let's visualize this. Tayo mga Pinoy, mahilig sa boxing. Sabi ko, kung ito ay punching power, Mike Tyson ba ito or Manny Pacquiao? Sabi niya, isabay mo yung dalawa. So, ganyan kalakas yung power ng water cannons na yan. So, those water cannons could have killed already Filipinos. Thank God, hindi nangyari yan. But now, mukhang itong mga Chinese, they're pushing the envelope further and now they're boarding. And again, if you look at the statement by Commodore Trinidad, ang sinabi niya dito is, parang hinintay lang nila na bumaril tayo sa kanila para gagamitin nila ito as casus belli to escalate this all the way. Thank God, fortunately, very professional yung ating mga troops. I think medyo special forces yung mga pinadala natin. But imagine, syempre, malaki din ang pride ng mga yan. So, the fact na pumayag sila para sa bayan, they had to eat their pride, no? I'm sure kayang-kaya nila itong mga Chinese na to kung hand-to-hand combat. I do martial arts and all of that. I can see these guys know their stuff. So, all kudos to our very professional Navy servicemen for doing the right thing. And in fairness, nag-adjust din naman tayo. Gumamit tayo ng mga bagong barko na hindi na pwede water cannon, diba? So, unti-unti na-adjust natin. I would say kung boxing ito, round 3 pa lang tayo So, hindi pa tapos ang laban, marami pa tayong pwedeng gawin. So, yes, nakakabahala, pero it's like you're watching boxing and round 3 pa lang may konting knockdown. Medyo mag-worry ka. But alam mo, mahaba-habang usapan to at we'll have our chance to get back at them. My understanding also is, in the meantime, things are going well for us in terms of making sure medyo malakas, fortified yung position natin sa West Philippine Sea. So I absolutely agree with Justice Carby, who I interviewed also on this issue yesterday. So just people to also check that interview. Who had a lot of laugh and fun. There's no reason for us to push the panic button. Having said that, though, you're dealing with China. Having said that, though, we saw Russia, how ridiculous Putin became when he just invaded Ukraine. We saw in the Middle East the tit for tat going on there. So having said all of these things, I'm not ruling out the possibility that our Chinese friends will do something funny. Kaya no room for complacency. So we are somewhere between complacency dapat and panic. Pero tuloy-tuloy lang yan. Huwag tayo magpa-intimidate. Psychological warfare lang yan partly. Yung mga trolls na pro-China, alam natin sino mga to, ginagamit na lang incident na ito para sisisihan tayo. Imagine mo, di ba sabi nga ni Senator Cynthia Villar, ito yung pinakagusto ko baba pa tayo, di ba? I mean, sisisihan natin ang sarili natin sa pagbubuli ng China sa atin. I mean, forget about being patriotic or not, sinong syungang nag-iisip na gano'n, na sinisisi ang Pilipinas for getting bullied? Parang ginusto yan So anong gusto nila? Maging tayo, province of China? Or we'll just allow China to have its way in our own literal backyard? So I think it's also, kaya nga mahalaga na hindi tayo masyadong paranoid kasi yun din ang ginagamit ng kabila at mga proxies nila to force President Marcos Jr. to reconsider his position.
So no panic, but don't get complacent, basically.
Absolutely.
So this is certainly an escalation, Professor. I guess my next question before we go into your tweet, which will be the body of the conversation. If this is an escalation, then why is China choosing to escalate now? And why is it in this specific form? Are we facing the sort of stuff we're seeing in the Indian Himalayas, in the Doklam, Sikkim region, where they're literally it's like barangay rambulan out there, where they're just clubbing each other with sticks? And if that's the case, should we start bringing out the Arni sticks for our special forces too? What's the future here?
Well, I and an academic friend, each of us have a black belt in one of the martial arts. So each of us volunteered to, in some ways help. But I was told hindi kailangan yan. All right, no, medyo magaling naman. Pang Krav Maga yatang kailangan dito eh. Hindi pwede yung
CQC, man.
Yeah, this is like Krav Maga, di ba? Hindi na siya yung offense, yung Krav Maga, ganun kaagad, di ba? So, well, these are interesting times. Yes, for me, okay, so there are a couple of things. So first of all, one reason I'm slightly worried ako is China has this thing they call short, sharp war. So they did that to Vietnam in 1988 before they took over the Johnson South Reef.
Yes.
They kind of tried to pull that off against India. Hindi lang once, multiple times. Kaya there were massive casualties. Medyo pang Bollywood yung nangyari. Nagsusuntukan sila and all at the ceiling of the world, right? And the idea is you don't need to go massive war, massive, live fire or missiles and all. You can have this calibrated, medyo deadly, pero calibrated pa rin, and then get the ball rolling. So this is a violent version of their salami slicing, whereby the salami slicing is not just smooth, may konting rough here and there. But obviously, with the Philippines, maging iba yan dahil grabe yung transparency initiative na ginagawa natin. So, kitang-kita sila. Thanks to, I think, Chinese DJI drone, kitang-kita yung ginagawa nila. Sa atin, ako nga, gumagamit ako ng CapCut and TikTok to edit yung mga videos na pinapamukha yung mga bullying ng China. So, so that's one thing. The other thing is we're a U.S. treaty ally. Vietnam didn't have that kind of alliance. India doesn't have that kind of alliance. And it's not like you're going to nuke each other for, 5 casualties. The world doesn't work that way. So that's why, kung titignan mo, hindi naman useless yung mutual defense treaty because hanggang ngayon, hindi pa rin ginawa ng China yung short, sharp war, which has always been my worry. And I've been writing on this for quite some time, observing what China did. But nevertheless, ang tinitry ng China is something short of short, sharp war, which is violent gray zone strategy. Probably we have to have a new name for it. So there are 50 shades of gray zone now. So this is not just using an armada of Chinese militia, banga-banga lang, water cannon lang. They're pushing the envelope further and further, but still technically not using live firearms. And here is where my argument comes in. Yes, no room for panic, but we have to be proactive. In what sense? So in 2019, nung nangyari nung Reed Bank crisis, kung maalala niyo, muntik na matay yung mga kababayan natin sa Denver, more than 12. Salamat sa Diyos, andun yung mga illegal Vietnamese fishermen. That's why they got saved. Otherwise, we would have lost probably more than a dozen of our kababayan, 2019 pa lang. Then U.S. Ambassador to the Philippines, Sung Kim, someone who knows his stuff, he dealt with North Korea, I think he's still in Indonesia right now. He suggested, baka yung MDT ay dapat ma-apply din sa gray zone attacks by China, including attacks by their militia forces. Pompeo also, the same year in 2019, this is the U.S. Secretary of State back then, for those who are not familiar, he also came up with a policy paper, I think it was June or July, I wrote something on that for AMTI, CSIs in Washington, kung saan sinabi niya na while neutral ang Amerika, pagdating sa status ng disputed land features, essentially, dahil sa loob ito ng exclusive economic zone natin, itong Panatag Shoal, itong Second Thomas Shoal, no? Ayungin Shoal, then it's part of the Philippines, not as a territory, but as an extension of our exclusive economic zone. So, in effect, 2019 pa lang na signal ng Amerika. I'm not a fan of Trump administration, people know that. But in fairness on this issue, I think the Trump administration kind of getting things right. And then for some reason, parang wala nang follow-through nangyari. So Biden, kudos to the Biden administration, Democrats are usually known as being weak on foreign policy, supposedly, right? But Biden did well in terms of putting more sanctions on China, reiterating na any attack on our public vessels, meaning Navy and Coast Guard, will be covered. But parang walang masyadong update ang narinig ko dito sa guidelines ng MDT na maging applicable ito sa gray zone. So yun ang hindi ko pa narinig. And in fairness, the one defense secretary who kept on pushing for this, and I'm not saying this because he's my fellow Ilocano, this is Secretary Lorenzana. He was very, very aggressive on this, na kailangan talaga natin i-update itong MDT para applicable sa realidad natin sa 21st century, effectively also itong gray zone. So I think this is where we have a problem. The MDT is good in terms of deterring China from going all the way, berserk, but it is not preventing them from, trying to humiliate us or try to prevent us from doing normal, reasonable, legal, legitimate resupply missions. Kaya nandito tayo sa panahon na ito. So US also has to do something about this thing, meaning they have to revise their mutual defense treaty with the Philippines to also apply. I think President Marcos kind of hinted on that, right? So ang sinabi niya, yung Chinese troll army, I'm sorry, yung Chinese general officers, nung tinanong siya sa Shangri-La, I mean, they were troll army, Shangri-La dialect, tinanong niya kay BBM essentially about what's happened. Di ba sabi ni BBM, you cross the Rubicon kung may pinatay ka na Pilipino. So, ibig sabihin, wala akong pake kung gumamit ka ng water cannon or actual cannon. Pag may namatay, eto na yan, di ba? But my sense is, kulang pa rin yan eh. We have to also say, any aggressive method, whether hand-to-hand combat or ano, could potentially draw in the Americans. So hindi useless ang MDT, pero kapos pa.
And I'm going to skip the questions a bit since you brought up the MDT, sir. You mentioned in your tweet that we need to modify and upgrade the Mutual Defense Treaty to include gray zone threats such as what we're facing now. Ray Powell, who's also a mutual of mine, he wrote in one of our GCs that he recommended that the Philippines begins conducting formal negotiations as stated in Article 3 of the treaty, consultations between foreign ministers to foreign ministers to send a message to Beijing that we're being serious. But you, on the other hand, you want to put it a step higher than that. You want actual modifications of the MDT. What specific policies would you want changed? What practicalities do you want changed into the MDT? And what do you expect Manila to achieve from these negotiations, sir? What would be our objective?
Yeah. Well, obviously, I don't buy into some crazy proposals na gawin natin EDCA-based yung Spratlys or Mavulis mga. I think that's a step too far. I also disagree with some of my friends, American friends, who keep on saying na kailangan ng mga Amerikano tumulong diretso sa atin pagdating sa resupply or yung pag-ayos ng fortification dyan sa yung insul. I think that's patronizing, to be honest. Medyo na-offend ako as a Filipino. Parang, no, we don't need that. Parang we can take care of ourselves, right? But definitely, I can see that American over-the-horizon presence would be important, especially if there's really an intelligence that suggests mga Chinese ay gagamit na naman ng mga ganitong mga tactics. Not to mention, potentially, the Chinese also using this in BRP Sierra Madre mismo, na maglalan silang tao dito and then mag-hand-to-hand combat sila, di ba? So definitely, some sort of over-the-horizon presence makes sense. Drones, frigates, things like that. Obviously, the Philippines should also use fast boats. It can get some of these fast boats from the Americans. Littoral combat ships, some of the newly retired ones, they can send it to us. Alam ko may mga corvettes sila na pina-retire din kasi hindi nila ma-maintain. You never know, diba? So there's so much more that can be done aside from just yung sinasabi natin na formal modification. Now, obviously, in diplomacy, especially defense diplomacy, there always has to be some element of strategic ambiguity. Because if you're just completely clear, so sabi natin, ganito ka, so Amerika sabi niya, okay, na-revise na po namin ang MDT, so following tomorrow, hindi na pwede yung mga following activities, di ba? Alam mo gagawin ng mga Chinese? Okay, so we still can do this.
So find the loophole.
So, exactly. So there always has to be some ambiguity there, but strategic. And my contention is, from Nixon administration, essentially from Kissinger all the way to Obama, hindi siya strategic ambiguity lang siya. Right? Now, naintindihan ko kay Kissinger dahil nung panahon ni Kissinger, tayo yung bully. Aminin natin, we had the best armed forces in the Philippines in the 60s and early 1970s. Now, I don't want to get into long conversation how things went wrong from there. But during that time, tayong ahead of the curve. So, ang takot ng mga Amerikano is gagamitin natin ang MDT natin para buliin lahat. Malaysians, Vietnamese, Chinese, gano'n, di ba?
Good times.
But by the time of Obama, my goodness, hindi na, ibang usapan na. So I'm very disappointed with the Obama administration. I think they were really, really weak in terms of standing by the Philippines. And
yes, sir.
And good friends, sila Richard Fontaine at CINAS, Center for New American Security, they have a new book called The Lost Decade, essentially blaming Obama, among others, for not holding the line during this time. Now, Obama was not totally useless because 2014-15 pa lang, nagpadala na sila ng mga drones and frigates kasi may plano ng China sa Ayungin Shoal. So, again, hindi totally useless but far from optimal. So, yun ang inaayos natin ngayon. Now, so going back to your question, so I'm just going around here.
Yes, sir.
I have to cover all the bases. Going back to your question, there has to be some updates on the MDT and some formal public signaling now na ang parameters ng Mutual Defense Treaty will not be modality based, meaning hindi necessarily armed attack, but any aggressive action that leads to the deaths of Filipinos or could endanger the lives of Filipinos. Some sort of statement like that should come out from the Americans, that the MDT will apply in an event that Filipino servicemen and public vessels and aircrafts will be subjected to any violent action and potentially lethal action. Something along those lines. I'm sure our lawyer friends in the defense DOD and DND can do something about this. But you get what I'm saying? Kasi kulang sa akin yung armed attack lang eh. Dahil sabi ng Chinese, ayun pala eh. Basta di tayo gumamit ng canon, di ba? Okay na yan, gamitin lahat, di ba? So now we're in that problem. So you have to narrow the room for maneuver for China. Essentially, their gray zone should go from 50 shades to probably just 2 shades. And then we can more effectively deal with them.
Okay, you mentioned in your recent tweet on the incident that the Philippines isn't helpless in the face of this sort of harassment by the China Coast Guard. So building on your previous statements about how the Philippines still has some kind of leverage to pull and room to maneuver in the escalation ladder. So what is the next step for us here? How do we match this level of escalation?
Yeah, as I said, round 2, 3 pa lang yan. In a sense na dami pa natin pwedeng gawin na hindi pa natin ginawa. Gumamit ng mas marami mga fast boats. Gumamit ng chopper. Baka yung chopper ni Bamban Mayor, ni Alice ko, baka pwede rin gamitin yung chopper na yan. May libre tayong chopper na makuha yan, di ba? I'm just saying, mga pogo na yan, pwede natin ma-confiscate yung mga chopper na ginagamit nila. Baka yung isang governor sa Ilocos, may chopper din yan. So, you get what I'm saying? So, there's so much more we can do. I mean, we're definitely not helpless. But, let's be honest, I'm sure Chinese friends are listening to me. It doesn't help that mukhang bully ang China. So, in a way, these images coming out are not totally, to make us look kawawa. They have a purpose too, right? Because it makes China really look bully and look bad. Kaya, pahiya talaga yung mga kapitbahay natin na mga walang yan na hindi tumutulong sa atin, di ba? I mean, I love ASEAN. I'll tell you guys, I've been writing on ASEAN for a long time. When I was a student, not long ago, I mean, hindi naman tayo ganun katanda. We used to write about ASEAN, constructivism, norm-based, blah, blah, blah. Yung mga ganun. So, ngayon, syempre, titignan ko yung ASEAN. It's just a bunch of mediocre and cowardly, leaders right and left. So, I'm really hoping that something will move here. I'm hopeful on Singapore. I'm hopeful on Indonesia. I'm very disappointed with Malaysia, to be honest. I expected far more from Anwar Ibrahim. But I'm not giving up on ASEAN. But in the meantime, huwag tayong umasa sa ASEAN talaga. Malabo for the meantime. Let's really spread the wings and look at not only US, Japan, Australia, mga usual suspects. Go for other non-aligned countries. So I just came from a week-long series of talks in Auckland, across New Zealand, Wellington, Christchurch. I think New Zealand could be a good, interesting partner. India definitely has been a good partner. South Korea is a US treaty ally, but they usually say busy kami sa North Korea, so di kami makialam. But they could be also good partners for us in terms of diplomatic language and all of that. So, ang dami pang pwede natin gawin yan. So, kaya nga sabi ko, don't press the panic button yet. Nevertheless, for shallow analysts, kaya kanina nagtutroll ako nung umaga ng night sinisino kasi 7 a.m. pa lang may mga interviews na tayo. I was just trolling people in the middle of interviews. Yung mga nagsasabi na mukhang mahinang US at mukhang mahinang Pilipinas, yun, dapat i-shut down din yung mga taong yan. Kaya sabi ko, something more drastic also has to happen here.
Perhaps you can explain it slowly to these people, because they would say, "Oh, we got bullied again." But how does the optics actually help us in the international community? What are the bootstraps here? How does this help us?
Sa akin naman, for me, if you want to be David versus Goliath, for some of us who have been in Florence, you don't need to even be in Florence. Just Google David. Medyo macho, medyo guapo, medyo maayos sa itsura, di ba? So we can be the underdog, but we have to look robust.
You have to look like it. So, yes.
Yeah, you have to look the part, right? So hindi pwede yung mukha kang kawawa. So actually that was my criticism, especially nung gumamit tayo ng yung parang alam mo na, di ba? Yung mga ano to, bahay kubo ba tang, I mean, you know what I'm saying? I love bahay kubo, but you have to look firm and strong. So in fairness, nung gumamit sila na more armored, all the private private commissioned vessels, that's an upgrade. But I think we have to move a little bit higher and higher. Use choppers, drones. Magpakitang gilas din tayo kasi nagtataka ako, bakit hanggang ngayon hindi pa rin alam ng mga kababayan natin at saka mundo, kasi umikot ako parate. Akala nila ang Pilipinas parang 1980s, 90s pa rin na kawawa. Actually not. We have capital ships already, a number of very modern ones, including one of my favorites, BRP Rizal. Philippine Coast Guard has a number of very advanced ones. And they're going to get even more advanced, bigger ones, more than 100 meters from Japan. So actually, medyo nagiging David na talaga tayo. So my suggestion, again, I'm not in the government and I'm not here to second guess them. I'm sure they have better information than me. But me being Heydarian, makapal mukha natin, I'm just going to say this out loud. Yeah, medyo be a bit more shameless. You know, you flex a little bit, di ba? Going back to your question, di ba?
Of
Flex it a
course.
little bit para hindi tayo mukhang kawawa, di ba? Kasi nakakadismaya yan. Kasi ako, active ako online, di ba? At minsan, ang daming comments. Lalo sa, so ang kagandahan ngayon ng Instagram, mas magva-viral ka pa sa Reels kaysa TikTok. So I've had multiple Instagram posts. Wala ako masyadong followers doon. Like 5-6 million views. Pero when I saw the comments minsan dun sa mga ibang issues like West Philippine Sea, nakakadismaya kasi parang ano ba yan? Kawawa naman tayo. Bakit ganun? Kinurakot ba yung budget? So I think we shouldn't also overdo yung mukhang inaapi tayo. So getting that
Yes.
right Goldilocks balance, I think, is something still under study, if I can put it that way. And guys, let's be fair. Let's be fair. First, let's be fair to China because I rather believe China than Digong. Because when China says may gentleman agreement na hindi nyo i-fortify itong BRP Sierra Madre, essentially you let the elements take over. Actually, I believe China over, I don't know, the Harry Roques or Panelos or Dutertes of this world. I think China is really angry, genuinely angry, because akala nila eto si BBM ay, you know, essentially Duterte 2.0. After all, unity team. So, naloko sila. Na Duterte sila. Kaya galit sila, di ba? At the same time, on our part, yung ating sandataan lakas, syempre nung panahon ni Digong, ano sila, ipit sila eh. Hindi nila magawa yung trabaho nila ng 100%. I can vouch for them because I dealt a lot with AFP during Digong's time. Kaya never ako nagpanic eh. Kasi alam ko the military was on the good side. Pero nevertheless, di nila magawa. Kumbaga kung hindi ka maka-sports gear eh. Mga gear 2, 3 lang kaya nila. Hindi nila ma-sports gear. So ngayon, na biglang okay na, may green light na kay BBM, nag-sports gear na sila. So in short, these are birth pains of the Philippines getting its strategy right against, let's call it, the most powerful navy in Asia and the biggest in the world. So I think we have to give some room for, not mistake, but margin for experimentation here. But we're getting there. Kaya in fairness, kudos to the Armed Forces of the Philippines for getting it right so far.
And the last part of your tweet, Professor, you said that you recommended the Philippines files new arbitration cases to whichever body, possibly like UNCLOS. And I guess the question would be, there. Well, recently the context behind it is the Philippines filed a claim in the UN on Saturday to extend our continental shelf into the South China Sea. And naturally, there's been increasing confrontations here with China. But you know, the normal naysayers here, the local Makapili lobby would say that, you know, we'll run into the same issues once we get into the UN. We can't have a binding reso at the Security Council because of the China veto, and you know, even something like a General Assembly resolution. I mean, even if it passes or an arbitration in The Hague passes, we can't really enforce that. The UN doesn't have a police against a rising power like China. And so what's the point of this? Why isn't this just, you know, humor the Makapili lobby? Why isn't this simply a scrap of piece of paper like what Digong said?
Well, Digong copied China. Let's be very clear. His talking points seem to be copy-pasted from the former of China. Even on the Reed Bank issue, sabi na Little Maritime Incident, that's essentially plagiarized from the Chinese, which makes you wonder, nothing suspicious at all. Well,
nothing, of course.
Going back to this, I obviously, Justice Carpio, I suggest you guys check my own interviews with Justice Carpio and reach out to him because he's really the guy on this issue. My take on the whole arbitration case is that, well, the 2016 arbitration case was not supposed to be the end-all, be-all. That was just supposed to be the beginning of a series of arbitration, except we got a Digong. And that's a leverage. So dun sa mga hindi nag-iisip, di ba? Ang sinasabi nila, ay wala naman silva yan eh. Well, first of all, it's about bargaining chip. It's about leverage because China cares about its image. Why? Because being a leader, as Paul Saib 101 to, leadership is not just having the biggest muscle. It's about trust, it's about confidence, it's about authority. At kung ikaw ay isang international outlaw, at the very least, you look like US, which is, you know, a country that whenever it loses a case, it doesn't want to abide by it, or US Senate not ratifying UNCLOS. So wala rin credibilidad ng China para sabihin na mas credible silang leader when they are also an outlaw. So that's why takot na ang China na dadalhin natin itong arbitration case sa General Assembly. I doubt we'll get more than 40-50 votes, but still it would matter if we could gather 40-50 countries to say China is a total bully. So unlike Russia, which is rogue talaga, medyo nag-rogue level na si Putin, China doesn't want to be a rogue state. China wants to be a leader, a hegemon in our part of the world. So we use that against them. We use essentially their strategic narcissism against them. That's why mahalaga itong arbitration case na yun. That's why stress na stress sila sa arbitration case. That's why, hindi natin alam anong mga ginawa nila kay Digong, pero that's why they really like Digong's term because he didn't assert the arbitration case. So kung talagang walang kwenta ito, bakit Digong had to keep on saying walang kwenta? The fact that he had to say it over and over again means actually may kwenta siya. Including the fact that dahil may arbitration case operationally, yan ang ginamit ng mga Amerikano, Australiano, Europeo para mag-conduct ng freedom of navigation operations. Dahil base sa international law, walang saysay yung 9-dash line ng China. So we provided the legal basis for international powers to push back against China. Of course, you're not going to get 10, but you're forcing China to retreat a little bit. You're putting China in a defensive position. Now, the other thing we have to keep in mind is this. Marami ako na back again to Nancy Binay. Bababa tayo. Di ba si Nancy Binay may isang beses na sabi niya, bakit yung Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, maayos tayo, hindi pa, bababa tayo. Well, there's a parallel to that in West Philippine Sea. Isang dahilan ng Malaysia ay medyo beshi-beshi sa China ngayon is because kinuha nila yung gusto nila. So in 2017-18, I interviewed Mahathir when he was here in Manila. He bashed China's BRI, saying, puro mga dodgy deals yan, death trap yan. And then, after sinampal-sampal niya yung China and warned about new colonialism, in China mismo, in Zhongnanhai, then China gave him discount. So nung kinuha nila yan, medyo bumait sila ng konti. And then later on again, nung 2020, ibang administration na yan, wala na si Mahathir by this time, nag-push ng Malaysia, actually, ending ni Mahathir administration. By the way, nag-push ng 2019 December, I was in Hainan, China during that time for a forum. Malaysia's filed for an extended continental shelf. This is the second extended continental shelf. One was, I think, 2007 or 8. This is the second one. While they were supposed to be beshi with China, so yung mga Malaysians, mabait-bait sa China, they'll say that, but actually they're fighting for their right. And in 2020, they unilaterally developed oil resources sa areas claimed by China and also by Vietnam. This is the West Capella that they use for Petronas oil exploration. So nung nakuha na naman nila gusto nila, bumait na naman sila, na-criticize nila yung AUKUS. So ganito yung kalakaran ng mga Malaysians. Because wala silang alliances, they have to be wise. So hindi totoo na ang Malaysia ay sunod-sunuran sa China kaya kumukuha siya ng investment. No. China, Malaysians, they play their game. They slap you, then they so smart, wise sila. Indonesia naman, even if hindi sila claimant sa West Philippine Sea, noong 2020, si Jokowi ay pumunta sa North Natuna Sea na nag-overlap doon sa China's 9-dash line. Sabi na, we'll have no compromise on this. Very strong statement. Nag-scramble ng F-16 fighters. I wonder why Indonesia's F-16 fighters wala pa tayo. And send warships and expanded their presence in that area. And then nung nag-back down ang konti ng China, then mabait na ulit sila. Vietnam, my goodness. Whether 1,000 years or 4,000 years, they have been resisting China. This is their entire national identity, right? So, ewan ko dito sa mga, whether ignoramos ng mga to or bayaran tong mga to or all of the above, napaka-false yung narrative nila na maganda yung investments sa ganitong bansa dahil essentially, suko sila sa China. That's not true. They all fought back in their own time. Guess which country was not fighting back against China during this period? Digong. So kapalpakan ni Digong din yun eh. What we're paying the price for is Digong's legacy. Because Digong, by being so subservient to China, spoiled China. And probably he gave them some gentleman special discount. And that's why yung mga Chinese ay galit na galit sa atin. So kung may kailangan tayo sisisihin sa nangyari ngayon ay China, but also Digong. Not the current president who's doing something right. Let's be clear. 93% of the Filipinos, in one way or another, essentially are on the same page as the current administration. And this is not the genius of Marcos. All of us here, we come from very different political persuasions. Of course, I want to always believe I'm above the fray. But all of us agree with this because this is our national interest. Ang outsider lang dito ay yung mga makapili na 3% na lang yata ngayon. In fact, I'm shocked na hindi 99% yung number. But hopefully we'll get there as time shows, na obvious na talaga yan ang itsura talaga ng China. The true face of China has been shown. But having said all of those things, I'm hoping, for me, peace through strength. That's my policy. And you don't have to be a superpower to have peace through strength. Vietnam has been doing that with China. Malaysia has been doing that in their own little ways. We see in history, smaller countries, when they stand their ground and get the grudging respect of superpowers, eventually they prevail. I can go to 18th, 19th century history. I can go to the time of the Greeks We can talk about Venice and Florence. Again, for anyone who actually has a legit education in history, not only some international relations theory, blah, 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 or nag-aral lang dyan sa tabi-tabi sa Europe, hindi ganoon. Yung talaga nag-aral ng gusto, nagkaroon ng, publications, alam niya yung sinasabi niya, and who has traveled the world and talked to world leaders and experts, they would understand, actually, the Philippines has leverage. So I came back to your question. There's so much more we can do here. But let me say one thing that is controversial, and I believe many will disagree with me. Ang isa pang dahilan na sa tingin ko ang mga Chinese ay napaka-aggressive sa atin is because nababahala sila sa polisiya natin patungo sa Taiwan, di ba? Because we are giving the Americans a lot of access dun sa bases sa Cagayan, Isabela, and potentially even in Batanes, not to mention Ilocos Norte, na may kinalaman ito in one way or another sa Taiwan. Huwag tayo magloko. Alam natin ang...
The Luzon Strait. We've sealed off the Luzon Strait.
Channel, exactly. Now, I agree with President Marcos Jr. that we, alam nga naman nakatenga lang tayo, hintayin lang natin na sugurin ng China ang Pilipinas at Taiwan. Kasi there's no way if China invades Taiwan, they're not gonna shoot down and bomb all of our bases in the north. Hindi naman nila hintayin yung neutrality natin eh. Sasabihin nila, gagamitin naman kanina, bobombayin nila. So I agree with Marcos that, President Marcos, that we need to be involved in some way to deter a war. Last thing you want is China as your immediate neighbor na giant island of Taiwan. Pero sa aking palagay, medyo malayo pa tayo sa war scenario. Again, of course, there's always probability for something crazy, but I think it's less than 50%. Ceteris paribus, right? As things stand. So, ang mungkahi ko dito, again, I know some people will disagree with me. Ang mungkahi ko dito is, gamitin natin itong Taiwan question para makuha tayo ng concession sa West Philippine Sea. In short, tell to China, gusto niyo gusto niyo mayabang kayo sa West Philippine Sea. Sige, bigyan namin ng mga Amerikano lahat ng gusto nila doon. Maglagay ko ng 10 HIMARS. Maglagay ko ng Typhoon. Because the game right now is missile systems. So, you tell to the Chinese, you hurt me in West Philippine Sea, parang balloon yun eh. You press me here, I'll punch you up there towards Taiwan. You go
It's just
straight
complete
to them.
area denial.
So, yeah, and if Americans put bases, HIMARS and all, sa northern Philippines, and a lot of missile defense systems sa south of Japan, Okinawa, etc., and then the Taiwan is built up, edi good luck sa China. Di canceled out na rin yung kanilang anti-cruise ballistic missile, A2AD, anti-access area denial. So, we have leverage. This is not a big leverage. Now, obviously, people will disagree with me and say, including my Taiwanese friend, of course, I have a soft spot for Taiwan. I used to be a fellow there. But I care about the Philippine national interest. And at this point in time, I don't think we are in a war footing yet. So kung wala pa tayo sa war footing, I hope I'm right. I mean, then gamitin natin itong Taiwan issue na to. Dahil sa tingin ko naman, hindi pa naman finalized talaga eh. At pwede naman natin i-dribble at i-calibrate gaano kalaki yung pwedeng maging access ng mga Amerikano. Because we still can determine how much access the Americans will have dun sa mga EDCA bases na yan. Actually, they're not even EDCA bases. They're sites. Meaning they won't have the kind of prerogative they used to enjoy during Cold War dahil bawal ng military bases. So let me correct myself again. Sites, EDCA sites. So we have far more prerogative on what happens there than ever nung panahon ng Subic Clark bases ng Amerika. So again, kung wala kang alam sa geopolitics, kung hanggang ka lang, influencer ka lang, pakit ka lang ganun, or you will think na you'll just see one side of the, there's this metaphor about four blind men, each of them touching one side of an elephant, thinking that is the whole world. That's the problem. But if you know all the dimensions, you know that it's an elephant. It's not just a foot. It's not just a rear. It's not just a face. It's not just a trunk. You have to see the full picture to make a right decision. And ang problema natin dito, maraming tao dyan who have no business making geopolitical analysis because obviously, nagbabasa lang sila ng Wikipedia or whatever. I mean, all of us have a right to read. But you get what I'm saying? And akala nila, yung kahapon singer, ngayon biglang attorney na sa On-Clause International. Ang dami mga ganun, di ba? Tago na lang natin. So, you know what I'm saying? Ang dami mga ganun. And then may mga useful idiots na ang alam lang nila, mga bulag-bulag, na 4 silang bulag. Yung isa ay buong mundo ay ito, ang trunk nitong elephant. Yung isa, buong mundo ay paanong elephant. When what they don't see is the 360 degrees. They don't see the whole elephant. And that's what I want to do. That's what I do. I mean, I keep on writing books because that's how I understand the elephant. I look at each part of this moving chessboard, a 3-dimensional chessboard. That's how you have to think about it. My first course was actually in pre-med, no? So I did anatomy, physiology. I look at, so for people who have a little bit of that kind of background, I think one of yours, at least in medical courses, you would understand how
Yes.
systems work. It's multi-causal. Many things come together. Pero kung wala kang background sa ganitong multi-causal analysis, you don't know about how the body works, you would think na, okay, pag press mong ganon, may heal na yung, yung sakit.
Right,
It
right.
doesn't work that way. You have to have differential analysis. That's the term that you have to use. So I use differential analysis, kind of like a doctor when I look at geopolitics.
Okay, next question is, how long can we sustain such efforts? I mean, all those gray zone tactics of China. There's concern that Chinese are out to wear us down materially, so economically and in terms of morale. So more of like it's becoming a battle of attrition. You see in Taiwan where the Taiwanese forces and their military equipment are really being strained by Chinese incursions. Can we endure this situation for years? If not, then can we be doing now? What can we be doing now to boost our defense resilience?
Well, again, sabi ko nga, wag natin i-press pa yung panic button, but at the same time, let's not be complacent. So you correctly pointed out, may degrading effect yung ginagawa ng China dahil limitado lang naman yung barko natin. Kung sirain mo ng sirain, yung abilidad natin mag-resupply ay naturally bababa. Kaya kailangan talaga natin ng long-term build-up. Pero isa sa suggestions ko is Americans, they should donate to the Philippines their recently retired littoral combat ships and probably use some of these high-level British fast boat inflatable ones. Ang dami pa nandyan eh. Nakapark, nakatenga lang. Bigay na nila, di ba? Ilang billion ang binigay nila sa Ukraine or sa Israel na napakalakas na bansa. Sino bang kalaban? Isang ano lang. Bigyan nila sa atin. Tayo may kailangan dito. Ang kaharap natin, China eh, di ba? So, that's where I'm coming from. Unfortunately, we don't anyone who claims they know what's going on inside Xi Jinping's head. I don't think even Xi Jinping knows what's going on there. This is a fluid situation. It's dialectical. It's back and forth. It's what what the correlation of forces, what the Soviets would say, or what Xi, the Chinese would say. The kind of alignment of forces. So no one can exactly say where there will be some sort of a reset or escalation. But I'm telling you, there is a very high chance if we keep on standing our ground and there's some adjustments and tweaking here and there, eventually Chinese will quietly sue for a new equilibrium. Under a new equilibrium, we have to have a kind of understanding na second Thomas Scholl, never tayo alis dyan. Patayin yung sarili nyo, never kami alis dyan. You just have to accept that. And in the meantime, kung gugulo ka pa, we'll give the Americans more access on Taiwan. Gugulo ka pa, we'll push back against you, Janssen Spratlys. I mean, we have to remind our Chinese friends, they got so much already. I mean, just don't be so greedy. I mean, you build all of those fake islands, massive bases, kinamo yung Mischief Reef. So there's so much more, diba? And by the way, yung status of the Panatak Shoal, Scarborough Shoal is still up in the air. So we have to also look at that. What are our options there? So in short, tell China, don't be so greedy. You already got so much. Take the win, right? But if you want to push, well, maybe we can also push back. And as I said, hindi na nag-iisang Pilipinas because ang daming galit sa China, di ba? Unfortunately, many people have a reason not to say it openly because, you want to be on good graces of China. But Taiwan and the Philippines are essentially on the same front line. The Japanese are also essentially on the same front line. We're all first island chain country. Countries as far as third island chain, like New Zealand, are already worrying about what's happening here. Second island chain countries like Australia are also looking at how they can help, how they can get involved. The French, everyone is coming in. So I think time is actually not necessarily on China's side. I think there's so much room for intervention here. And as I said, para itong boxing, round 2-3 pa lang tayo. Wag tayo maging, di ba? Actually, I would rather use football as an example. I know Filipinos don't like football kasi sobrang boring, sobrang tagal. Wala pang goal, di ba? Or kung may isang goal ngayon, hindi pa tapos ang laban, di ba? This is not basketball. This is football. This is boxing.
We're keeping you
in the next rounds, yeah.
And speaking of the football, so we know we're keeping you from the Euros, which is going on right now. So we're now, as we entered 1 hour, perhaps we can go into some fast talk, some fast questions, sir, from our audience.
Fast talk,
yeah.
Wasn't
and
that
from our
fast?
and from our defense analyst friends on X, as we come to a close, just a few questions. You can answer them as short or as long as you want to. So, Alex, first question.
Yeah, there is a question from our commenters. So, how sure are you that Washington will honor their MDT with the United States? There are those naysayers in this country and on X who will say that US will let us down, like how they did in 2012 with the Scarborough standoff. That is a question.
Hmm. Well, I mean, Ukraine was not even U.S. ally. All right, let's not forget about it. And yung Ukraine joining NATO was total nonsense. No one in his right mind believed that a broken third world level corrupt country like Ukraine would be allowed into NATO. No one wanted them inside NATO. That's not true. You know, Bush said something stupid in 2008 about Georgia, Ukraine's future. But anyone who's familiar with the facts knows that Ukraine was essentially on its own. And yet, as soon as Ukraine showed a little bit of yun nga, feeling ko yung iba na-hurt sila kasi si Zelensky, comedian na naging totoong leader. Habang yung isang tao na mayor, naging leader kunyari, pero comedian ang lumabas sa kanya, si Jetski Boy, di ba? So,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
paya sila kay Zelensky. I remember very well. Everyone thought within 48 hours, Kiev was gonna fall when Russia invaded. Today, yes, Ukraine has not got Donetsk and Luhansk and Crimea back, but how many casualties Russian was inflicted? They probably have 500,000 casualties of injured and dead. That's supposed to be the strongest army on earth, and this was a land invasion, far easier than amphibious attack or anything like that. If ever China wants to invade Taiwan and all, so actually, natatawa ako when they use the Ukraine example, because the Ukraine example should be exactly the reason why you would think the West will help the Philippines. Because unlike Ukraine, the Philippines has a mutual defense treaty with the United States. And unlike Ukraine, where there was Europe to take care of Ukraine, supposedly, here, US is directly responsible for what's happening. Guam is not too far away from the Philippines, right? US Indo-Pacific Command is not too far away from here. US has direct treaty alliances here. China is the most important rival to the United States. So for some of us who bother to actually, or who are important enough, rather, let's put it nicely, who are important enough to have been talked to by people who are going to run potentially, whoever. I mean, I've talked to people who could be the next ones in charge next year, no matter who wins, right? Although my suspicion right now is Trump has better chance than ever. They will tell you they're China first. In fact, Trump is China first. Biden is China first. Other Republican candidates were China first. China first, not in terms of China first interest, but China is our number one threat. And if you look at the Gallup surveys and Pew surveys, 40% of Americans see China as a number one rival and threat. Only 1% or 2% said North Korea or Iran. And 12% said Russia. So there is a bipartisan consensus in US that something has to be done about China. And the idea that China will invade a treaty ally and US will do nothing, and then gagamitin mo yung Ukraine na hindi US ally, na katabi ng NATO, Europe, and then look at 60 billion they give to Ukraine palang this year, and all the help. I mean, Ukraine is doing what it's doing to Russia because of NATO's help. And NATO helped them when they saw may laban palang Ukraine. So actually, the right lesson from Ukraine is, matakot ka kung China ka. Dahil mas mahirap sumugod na amphibious, dahil napaka-similar yung weapon systems ng China sa Russia. I wonder why, di ba? So actually, maging more confident ka sa NATO weapon systems, right? The only reason why Ukraine is not regaining back those places is, of course, there's implicit nuclear weapon usage because Russia is desperate. Don't forget, Prigozhin almost marched all the way to, Putin almost lost his seat. I mean, things are really bad in Russia. And people are saying Russia is doing great. They're growing 2 to 3%. An average Russian earns 1/10 of an average European or an American. All right. I have Russian friends. I know the truth on the ground. So growing 2% for a country so poor compared to the West is great for them. And Russia is almost selling everything it has to India and China alone. So much for being a superpower, and you're so dependent on Russia. So I feel bad for Russia because I think Russia can do better than that. And I think their current strategy is horrible because both Finland and Sweden have joined NATO. So Ang dami mga syungan ng sinasabi ng mga tao dyan. I mean, John Mearsheimer is an interesting guy. Actually, if you read John Mearsheimer, I completely disagree with his NATO expansion argument. But his number one argument is China is the real threat to the US.
And this is the real flashpoint.
China. Exactly. So actually, if you want to use Mearsheimer is saying, wag na natin pakialaman ng Ukraine and Russia dahil dapat mag-focus tayo sa China. So
China.
I just find it so funny. People are just getting right and left, some sort of argument that they have digested, and then they don't, if you scratch the surface, it actually works against you. So it takes really certain level of ignorance to think that Ukraine is actually not. And last point, because of Ukraine precisely, lumaki ang tulong ng US sa Taiwan. Because Taiwan is saying we don't want to be next Ukraine. Dahil sa nangyari sa... And let's not forget, some of the exercises we're doing now in the Philippines are preparing for all-out war. Guess what tactics we're using? The tactics that Ukraine used to bludgeon the Russians, right? So we saw the superiority of NATO-grade weapon systems. HIMARS is very, very important. So, yun nga, they're just a bunch of amateurs and fools out there who are keeping saying, Ukraine. Like, actually, Ukraine, it should be a reason why, people should be ashamed of someone like Duterte. Because compare Duterte to Zelensky, right? Look at how Zelensky, his life was endangered. There's assassination plot on him every single day. He stayed in Kiev. I was in Munich Security Conference when Zelensky was there. This is just a few days before invasion happened. Everyone told him, wag ka na umuwi. Kasi baka susugot talagang Russia. Biden was very convinced. And some of these makapili fools said, no, Russia will not invade. I mean, screenshot ko, nakasulat pa nakasulat pa sa Rappler, nakalugay, the Russians are coming. Pinagtawanan yung threat na mag-invade ang Russia. So when the Russians invaded, I think these people should retire for good. They're completely useless people. They're worse than useless. They're toxic people. They know nothing about... Everyone told Zelensky, please wag ka umuwi sa Kiev. Delikado ka. And yet he still went back. And then the invasion happened. And look what the guy did. While the invasion is happening, he would live stream himself, ask for help, and tell his people to stay. Honestly, Ukraine is an inspiring case of resistance. It's an unfortunate and tragic case of a smaller nation being invaded by a larger nation thanks to a genius called Putin. Of course, I'm being sarcastic. But it's also a case that should shame some of the people here and elsewhere who think that the way forward is the Digong way. I'm sorry. Mahiya ka kung ikaw si Digong. Zelensky is admired all around the world, even in countries that do not support Ukraine because of their fear of Russia. What is Duterte's reputation around the world? I mean, so I think people have to be careful who sinong ina-idolize nila, si Digong or si Zelensky. Pumili kayo.
All right.
Okay, I'm going ahead with the next question. So you mentioned about nuclear weapons. There is a question here from the commenter. Was the 1987 Constitution ban on foreign and nuclear weapons a mistake? So, that's the question. Like, is our situation different if we actually have nuclear arsenal on our hands?
Or like planting America, like it's a fast question. Like, well, what do you think about American nukes in the country?
Wow, this I didn't see. In fairness, that's the one question I didn't see coming. I mean, obviously, I'm against the U.S. bases in the Philippines, meaning the old way, the Cold War way, because I think once we kick them out, we should have started getting our act together. Unfortunately, we didn't, right? So, kaya nga biglang we had to have VFA and all of that. So, I think the moral for us is, kung magmamaganda ka, magtapang-tapangan ka, back it up. And unfortunately, that didn't happen, right?
So you're against U.S. bases, against U.S. nukes in the country.
So I'm actually agree with the Philippine Constitution barring bases. But does that mean that we should not leverage our alliances? Of course not. So I think there should be a Goldilocks way. So I'll give you an example of Turkey, right? Or Turkey. Turkey is actually a NATO member. It's the second largest member of NATO. And yet, I'm not a fan of Erdogan. I have criticized the guy on many fronts, and I've been very transparent about that. But Turkey is very smart in using different superpowers for its own national interests while building its own capability. I mean, Turkey's economy was not much larger than the Philippines 20, 30 years ago. They were a broken, bankrupt nation. Pobreng Turkey 20, 30 years ago. We were not too far away from them. And look at what they have done in the last 30 years. They have one of the best drones in the world. A little bit overrated, but nevertheless, they're developing fifth generation fighters together with the British. They have one of the strongest, most prepared armies in Middle East, if not in the world, right? So I think Turkey is a good example whereby you can be a US ally or a NATO ally in this case, but that shouldn't stop you from building your own defense capabilities and also playing smart diplomacy. I think like the Turks were crazy because at some point they got S-400 missile systems from Russians because the Americans were not giving them the Patriot missile or something, or some fight over the F-35. So I don't know. So I think there's an example of Turkey whereby you can remain an ally, juice it, but at the same time build up your own capabilities. And by the way, Turkey's population is even smaller than the Philippines. I think they're barely 85 million people. So medyo maya naman tayo sa sarili natin because we're a larger country than Turkey. And just like Turkey, we're a trans-regional state. And we're both having some sort of defense alliance. So this is where I come in. It's not a clear-cut case between Team US Kaba or Team China. I think that's a false debate. This should be Team Philippines and then how you leverage it. So I think Turkey is a very good example for me. South Korea is another very inspiring story for me because if you look at South Korea, of course, everyone knows their BTS or whatever, or Hyundai, whatever. But they have one of the 10 largest arms industries in the world. And by some indications, they're probably the second strongest army in Asia, just after China, right? So ahead of Japan and India. Again, very small country. Ano bang population of South Korea? Half of the Philippines, right? 50, 55? So again, another example, US ally, may bases pa nga ng US, but that didn't stop them from building their own defense capability. In fact, our best weapon systems come from South Korea. Well, they're not the best in the world, but the best that we got, right? So again, I can give you the examples of Korea and Turkey, two US allies or NATO members in the case of, but that they still develop their own capabilities. So if ever US leaves them, I think they have good chance of standing on their own and duking it out. And swerte nga tayo, unlike Turkey and South Korea, hindi natin katabi yung mga sakit ng ulo, di ba? Sila, North Korea, China, katabi nila kaagad. Tayo at least may degree of separation through the seas. So, talagang problema natin dito is hindi natin ginamit yung mga advantages natin and napakakulang yung strategic culture natin. And this is where, by the way, guys, I wanted to do this a while ago. Let me congratulate you guys for what you're doing here. I'm not saying this because
thank you.
I'm telling you guys, sana lang we had this 10 years ago, right? Of course, bata pa tayong lahat nun. You get what I'm saying? Itong mga discussion na ganito ay dapat ginagawa ng mga civilian na katulad natin. Hindi lang dapat behind the scenes. Dahil pag pumunta ka sa ibang bansa, you go to Istanbul, talk to an ordinary Turk, he can tell you about geopolitics of Europe and Eurasia. You go to South Korea, the level of education about strategic culture is really, really high and very, very impressive. That doesn't mean they eat and live, on foreign policy like us. No, but the average Turk and average South Korean is very and their strategic culture at the elite level is really, really high. So unfortunately sa Pilipinas, hanggang purong trapo politics, domestic insurgency, ganun. So kailangan na talaga natin i-level up dito. Again, kaya a part of me, as much as I get frustrated with a lot of nonsense out there, para sa akin naman, I'm an educator at the end of the day. Para sa akin, itong TikTok, sinistop niya na. Medyo hindi na nagustuhan yung discussion natin. As much as I see na may mga nakakabahala ng mga tao, but itong mga tong pinapakinggan, I think, again, these are birth pains of a rising middle power. That's what the Philippines is to me. We can become a legitimate middle power in the 21st century. At kasama dyan, hindi lang armas, pero pag-iisip, tamang pag-iisip, at tamang debate. You're free to disagree with me. You're not supposed to agree with everything I said, although I'll assure you, everything I say is based on years and hundreds of books of research and journals.
Of course.
But whatever. Even if you don't agree with me, it's okay. But listen to my case and let's have a discussion about it. Okay lang. We need to have kinds of discussions, yeah.
And we'll go next to one of our main questions is common Makapili, common local Chinese SciComm talking point, which is that the Philippines is a vassal state. So perhaps explain to the useful idiots at home, Professor, why isn't the Philippines a vassal state? Why aren't we simply walking into the trap of the Americans trying to escalate or a pawn about to be devoured? Explain to them in simple terms, sir. Maybe in football terms.
Yeah. I mean, something. Have you seen? I'm a bit trollish on Twitter.
Yes,
Precisely because sometimes I realize kung hindi naman maayos kausap tong tao to, edi pagtawanan ko lang. I mean, like, as much as I'm patient and as an educator, I also know when to just, hindi ko siseryosoin to. Hindi ka naman seryosong tao, ba't kita siseryosoin? And then I had some bad experiences, pinatulan ko, tapos siniscreenshot nila. They will try to make something out of it. Some of these idiots who push for parliamentary change without any understanding of basics. By the way, I'm not against change for parliament. But I'm saying some people na nagmamarunong. Hindi si Robin Hood, pero yung mga pinapakinggan niya. But anyway, forget about it. My point is, I just realized, tawanan mo na lang. Kasi actually, I enjoy it. I eat this for breakfast. I don't do breakfast, but this is my breakfast. Yeah, I do this for fun. Because ba't kita seryoso? And obviously, you're just there to spread nonsense and toxicity, right? Now, going back to this, ang unang sagot ko, I mean, I've done it. Also, gusto mo maging vassal tayo ng China, di ba? Like, that's what I was saying. Galit ko kasi gusto mo sa inyo kami na maging alipin kayo ng China. So, minsan, that's how I fight back right away. I throw it at them, di ba? Because a lot of people who are doing
because
this...
they do want us to be vassals of China.
And they have contempt for us Filipinos. Some of these people are even racist. We don't need to get into this. I know some of these people personally.
We've seen them.
Anti-US and all. Tapos, napaka-racist sa Pinoy. They really look down at us. And they have all of these racialist nonsense views. So galit na galit sila na hindi tayo nakikinig sa kanila, or I'm not gonna get in trouble.
And yet they would claim that
China, not necessarily from China, but you get what I'm saying.
They would claim that we're the xenophobes. They would claim we're the racists.
Well, apparently, any criticism of China will make you xenophobic. When in fact, I'm only talking about the policies of the Communist Party of China. I love the Chinese people. Among my besties from childhood were Chinese. My first girlfriend was Chinoy, etc. So no, I have nothing against. I love Chinese people. I had great time, by the way, in China. I've been to China many times. Maybe because they want to keep their enemies closer. But I've been to Beijing. I've been to Hainan many times. Although hindi ko nagagamitin yung mga ibang phone na ginamit ko doon. But you get what I'm saying? This is not against the Chinese people and civilization. Especially Chinese Singaporeans, Chinese Taiwan, whatever, or Chinese Filipinos especially. But also people in China. No. So wag tayong magpaano sa nonsense na ganito na. Now, having said that, I am critical of our relationship with the United States. And I think this is where, again, you're free to disagree with me. Because, I mean, come on. Again, okay,
they don't give us stuff.
Israel, okay, fine. We can have a long conversation about that, right? Ukraine sa gitna ng giyera. Pero Jordan, Pakistan, meron silang mga F-16 fighters. Go to the inventory of Jordan and Pakistan. Poorer country than us. And look at the weapon systems they have. Egypt, again, sige, debate natin, 1979 peace deal, siguro part of. Pero hindi ko rin masikmura yung Egypt. Ang dami nilang Abrams tanks. Ang dami nilang mga magagandang American fighters. So I don't buy this argument na hindi. So I think a lot of us Filipinos, especially, here naman I'm gonna go against the other side. Yung mga masyadong pro-US, yung mga NBA boys, ang tawag natin sa kanila, tuwan-tuwa sa Amerika, binigyan lang tayo ng 10 million dito, 50 million. Yeah, but I mean, it's pathetic in the great scheme of things. I mean, sino bang kalaban ng Jordan? Daesh? Sino bang kalaban ng Pakistan ngayon? Taliban, di ba? Sino bang kalaban ng PLA, di ba? Or themselves, right? I'm sorry, I don't buy that argument. And I'll tell you what, I told that to our American friends repeatedly. Pichugin lang yung binibigay niyo sa akin. For sure, kukunin na naman ng mga kabilito to use it against my argument. But no, that's where I do have an independent-minded guy because I criticize Russia, I criticize US, I criticize China, depending on the issue. But last time I checked, it's not US which is claiming West Philippine Sea, nor is Russia. And alam natin sino. So itong mga tao na worried na maging vassal tayo ng US, itong mga tao na gusto nila maging province tayo ng China. And sorry, wala na si Digong eh. Mukhang hindi na siya babalik. So, sorry.
And we'll just skip to the last two questions, Professor, because we've took up a lot of your time. So how could the government address you? We mentioned the Chinese propaganda. We mentioned the blatant disinformation campaign. We saw the Microsoft threat intelligence report last year talking about how a certain country in Asia is sponsoring state-sponsored disinformation campaign on social media and actively involved in cyber attacks. So how can the government, what's your recommendation of how can the government address the people that blatantly spread local propaganda in this country and parrots the official China line? Because you see certain places that it's copy and paste. It's the Chinese line from Makati. And so how do we insulate the population from these blatant disinformation campaigns, which are just out to demoralize our people? It's information warfare.
I'm telling you, so when Russia invaded Ukraine, I was still in Europe. I went to Paris. I went to Berlin for consultations after Munich Security Conference. And then I come back to the Philippines. I open my laptop. The first thing I see is John Mersheimer in my comment section by people who are, I don't know, influencer of, I don't know, Shopee or Zalora, right? Like, wow, suddenly Mersheimer is a household name, right? Interesting. I'm sure this is not really a Kremlin operation and all of that, right? At nahuli din yung mga China-based trolls ng Facebook ng 2022 or 2020, right? Na nagpo-push for Duterte, meaning Sara's president, VP si Duterte. So
Yes.
huling-huli talaga sila na gumagamit talaga ng mga disinformation campaigns dito. This is all public information. You don't... I'm a Democrat. I love our democracy. I'm a pluralistic person. I like debates. I also believe there should be treason law for peacetime.
Of course.
Hindi lang sa wartime. So I'll keep it there before I get into trouble.
Oh,
I'm sure
of
many
course.
progressive friends will just say, but we have to have a treason law for peacetime. And kung ikaw talaga, ay talagang ano naman talaga, edi mag-register ka as foreign influence agent. Legit, okay naman, basta maging transparent ka. Huwag kang magpanggap na think tank ka. Huwag kang magpanggap na scholar ka. Wala ka naman.
Potemkin, Timtac.
Huwag kang
Potemkin,
magpanggap
Timtacs.
na ano ka, kung talagang front agent ka. Pero i-register mo yan para lang transparent, di ba? Ang problema yung iba, nagpapanggap pa na academic experts, gano'n. Alam naman natin diretso from the, fresh from the, talaga yung mga sinasabi. They're not even intelligent enough to give it a spin. I mean, these people are like, actually, I feel bad for China. Kumuha naman kayo na mas magaling. Actually, wag na lang. Sige lang, stick with these people. It makes our job easier. But, napaka third rate naman yung mga ano nila dito sa Pilipinas or around the region. Minsan parang, hindi, nabobore ako. I mean, it's not even intellectually challenging. I mean, bastos sila. They say nonsense, all of that, nakakairita. Pero at the intellectual level, I'm sorry. No. They just don't cut it. No. They're jokes. They're clowns. So yun, there should be treason law for peacetime.
Actually, sir, before we go to our last question,
Yeah.
Professor Jemmy Gatdula over at the College of Asia and the Pacific, he wrote a column recently about how the Commonwealth treason laws have something about demoralizing the AFP, demoralizing our local forces. And, people are confused why that hasn't been the case when you literally have people out there that are actively attacking our servicemen and women. And so perhaps, do you have a comment on that, sir, or no?
Yeah.
We can.
Ako naman, para sa akin, mahalaga na magkaroon tayo ng reforma pagdating sa legal system. But we have to be very careful about it. So this is where
Yes,
the
sir.
progressive me. We have to be careful kasi madali weaponize yan. Tama naman si Justice Carpio. Pag medyo slippery yung definition ng treason, mamaya, paano kung bumalik yung kabila, di ba? Lagot tayo lahat, di ba? I mean, you know what I'm saying, right? So,
Of course.
dapat mag-intelligent tayo. Kasi mamaya sabihin na, hindi, mga pro-American to. So careful lang tayo dyan. So, kaya ako, in the meantime, habang inaayos pa itong batas na ito, and I really hope it will be done in the right, legit way, and mayroon naman tayong meron tayong blueprints from democracies, Australia, Taiwan, right? They all have anti-foreign influence laws and legislation. So actually, the blueprint is there in legitimate democracies. But we have to strengthen also the safeguards, unfortunately. And, having a Marcos Jr. as the president, it always raises some questions also. But having said that, let me go back as a last point to our role. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Because for me, even more important than laws are norms, the unwritten rules. Kaya mahalaga talaga i-call out natin sa anong klase kang bansa kung binabastos mo yung mga sarili mong sundalo pag dinidefend nila yung sarili mong teritorya. I mean, that is a violation of dignity of any citizen in any country.
Agree.
So we have to call that out. Now, because you had someone like Duterte who would joke about it and sometimes probably more than joke about it for 5-6 years, unfortunately na-desensitize tayo sa shock value nito. But we have to correct it because that norm has to be restored. So for me, the norm is even more important than laws because informal rules govern our everyday life. Laws are there when court cases come in, di ba? So, ang trabaho natin dito is, tama sinabi ni Justin Bakisal, we need a floor. We need a floor. Any self-respecting nation has to have a floor of what is acceptable as a matter of foreign policy debate. Pag openly treasonous yung sinasabi mo, hindi na legitimate debate yan, umalis ka na dito. Umalis ka na dito. Diba? It's like, you don't debate if cannibalism is okay. No, it's wrong, period.
Yes,
no
sir.
debate about that. So these idiots are saying it's legitimate to debate that. No,
And don't
floor.
platform them. Don't platform
Yeah.
these people.
It's wrong. Rape is wrong. Cannibalism is wrong. Period. No debate around that. Tapos,
Exactly.
that should be the floor. And then we can debate about what punishments, whatever. But the floor has to be.
A cordon sanitaire on these people, sir. That's what you're
I
recommending.
mean, no, I want them to be out there and making full out of themselves.
Of course.
But we have to make sure hanggang 3% na lang sila forever at
Of
the very
course.
most.
And the last
The
question.
Ivan,
Oh,
not
okay.
not the last question. Like for example, if somebody used the argument of the Monroe Doctrine to describe what the U.S. is doing in the West Philippine Sea, how do you respond to that kind of
It's like China.
who
This is
use that?
China's Monroe Doctrine. This is their backyard. There's a prominent large Makapili account saying that. How would you?
So we're using the bad things US did to Latin America as a justification for China doing bad things to us, Filipinos? I mean, boba pa
Yeah.
tayo. Kaya love na love ko si Cynthia Villar. It makes sense. Boba pa tayo. And I want to make a podcast about that. Boba pa tayo, di ba? I mean, what kind of mind would
And they say it.
dahil
These people
ginawa
would
ng
say it.
US na 200 years ago, tama na gagawin ng China sa atin? I mean, what kind of, it's not even loser. It's even worse it's less than loser, right? Less than zero. Ako, I criticize US policies in other parts of the world. Even in our history, hindi ko naman nakalimutan yan eh. Pero magfo-focus ka sa ginawa ng US in 1905 or 1919 or 1901 or 1898 tapos ikalimutan mo yung ginawa ng China nung May 5, 2024. I mean, pababa tayo, di ba? I mean, again, Cynthia Villar, di ba? Ultimate
Yes.
wisdom. I mean, kaya nga, like, punta ka sa Vietnam or China, di ba? Love na love nilang China. Wag na lang North Korea. I've been to North Korea. I don't recommend it for these people. Kawawa naman ang kawawa North Korea. They need to feed their people. Okay, so, punta kayo sa China. Go to China, have an academic debate about China's claims being BS or actually, well, BS naman talaga, but go to China and argue against China. Let's see what will happen to you, my friend, right? Or actually, don't go to even a university. Go to a simple stall sa Hanoi and openly say, mali ang Vietnam, tamang China, kunin nyo na yung East Sea. All right? Good luck sa'yo, di ba? I'm not sure you're gonna come out alive. So you get what I'm saying? Like, in no self-respecting country, kasi mahilig naman sa communist country ito mga pro-China, di ba? You will be allowed to have that kind of debate, whether legally or normatively. For me, normatively, there has to be a floor. Kasi naintindihan ko naman, dahil ang tagal natin nag-depend sa US, something I'm very critical of. Hindi tayo at napakawalang kwenta yung mga leaders natin, mga matagal-tagal. Although I like Ramos naman here and there. Hindi tayo nag-develop ng sense of national identity. Kaya, again, I'll end on this note. Para sa akin, this is an opportunity for us to refound the Philippine Republic. Kumbaga, yung ginawa nila Rizal noong 1890s ay first attempt. Unfortunately, na-hijack ng Amerikano mga gringo yan. But now we have a second attempt to build ourselves as a self-respecting nation. And I'm telling you guys, I go all around the world. I've been doing this for quite some time. Pero ngayon, I feel the respect. I feel the recognition. Maybe it helps to be also me doing that. But do you get what I'm saying?
You can hold your head up with pride now, and like it's different. Certainly, the culture has changed.
I mean, we were having that already during Aquino, in fairness naman. Pero nung time na yun, kasi wala pa tayong mga barko, wala pa tayong ganun. Kasi nagsisimula pa lang tayo eh. Aquino just started this AFP modernization in 2011-12. At during that time, medyo andun pa rin yung image sa atin na, sick man of Asia. But thanks to Pinoy, thanks to Lorenzana and the likes during Digong, and thanks to what's happening under the current administration, 10 years later, I think we got both materially, psychological, and culturally, the kind of pizzazz and self-respect that I think we deserve as Filipinos. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. So, if itong mga tao na tang concern lang nila vassalage, China ba tayo, Team US, bahala kayo sa buhay nyo. That's the wrong debate for us. For me, the debate should be choose your alliances, be a reliable ally, but at the end of the day, take care of your own national defense capability needs. Let's do what Singapore is doing. Let's do what Vietnam is doing. Let's do what Turkey and South Korea have been doing. Poor countries 20, 30 years ago. Turkey, poor until recently. And yet, look at how far they have gone. Mas magaling ba engineers nila sa atin? I don't think so. Mas magaling ba yung mga thinkers nila sa atin? I don't think so. Tas marunong pa tayo make English. Diretso lang natin pwede download yung mga bagay-bagay. And we're yet treaty ally of US. Not to mention a good friend of many important countries like Japan, French, etc. So I see this as a good challenge. Actually, good yun sa akin. Good yun sa akin, diba? We are in interesting times, and I congratulate you guys for this effort. I think you have began this. Let me be the kuya now. I think you have commenced this initiative at a very important juncture in our history, and I think I really hope. I always said I'm not gonna get this right all the time. I'm gonna make mistakes, not too many times, but I'm gonna make mistakes here and there. But if I inspire, in my own little ways, a new generation of Filipinos to take strategic discussion seriously, to take our politics seriously while being humorous, as I do, then I'll be happy. Then I'll be happy that that will be my legacy. Ibang usapan na kung mag-ano ako. But in the meantime, that for me is my hope is this will be my biggest legacy. So in you guys, I see the continuation of that legacy. So tuloy-tuloy lang. Let's keep the flame going.
And it's worth, the feeling is mutual, Professor, because a lot of your talking points, it's getting down there, sir. Like it's being repeated down there by the people on the field. And we'd like to end on that high note. Perhaps, Alex, you can do a bit of the last.
Yeah, any last words for our listeners and our audience and the Filipino people? Like you mentioned about, in the discussion for geopolitics, anyone can chime in, anyone can take part. So what is your message for people who wanted to participate and be part of these kinds of discussion?
As I said, hindi ito rocket science. The same way economics is not a rocket science. I really hated when some academics and social scientists make things overly complicated because they don't know what they're saying. When you write for the New York Times and Foreign Affairs of this world, you will be forced to write clearly and know what you're talking about. A lot of these academics na nagmamagaling never published in any legitimate publication, and I doubt they really have what it takes. No offense. I want to be really humble here, but I really, there's some people there who have to be put in the right place. So don't be intimidated by mumbo jumbo. Minsan, syempre, nag-English ako, baka na-intimidate kaya. That's not the thing. Look at my effort to speak Tagalog better. Medyo konyotic. Mas magaling ang Ilocano ko. But you get what I'm saying? This is not rocket science. This is about passion. This is about effort. But of course, having said that, you also have to give due respect to people who are putting, hours of their life into scholarship and proper understanding of this issue. People who look at the four sides of the elephant, not just one side. So it has to be a combination of reverence and at the same time making sure na hindi tayo ma-intimidate sa mga ganitong discussion. Foreign policy is a national issue. Hindi dapat sa mga English-speaking people lang yan or mga konyo lang yan or sa mga tao na sa DFA or strategic. This is a national issue. So lahat tayo dapat pag-usapan natin yan. My belief is the same on economics. Economics should not be just for people from, School of Economics or people with economics background. Economics is also about public policy. And when you talk about public policy, lahat tayo apektado dyan. Are we willing to negotiate inflation at the expense of growth? Are we supposed to put growth above inflation? Can we have a balance? These are legitimate discussions about everyone. I'll tell you what, one of the things that made me really happy and proud throughout those years, especially when I was working in GMA Network, kasi Tagalog lang pwede, di ba? Marami akong ma-meet na tao na for some reason, ma-recognize ka. I'm not saying I'm famous or anything, but sabi na, ikaw yung prof, di ba? Aba, simple lang pala itong onklos na to. Thank you, prof. Napakaganda explanation mo. Yun lang pala eh. I really felt proud about that because a true educator is someone who doesn't make things simplistic, who doesn't dumb it down, but makes it relatable and really gets the essence across. It's not really easy. It took me, 2,000 articles and half a dozen books to get there. And not to mention, hindi ko na, naka 2,000 vlogs na yata tayo. It's not easy. It's muscle memory. It's hard work. It's dedication. It's faith in the Lord. It's stoicism also. But I think it's the right thing we're doing. And as I said, ako, mag-isa lang ako. I may have hundreds of thousands of followers. I don't know, million followers. But that's nothing in the greater scheme of things. But if I inspire other people, not only with social media followers, with influence, with passion, with patriotism, to also pass down the message, I think I fulfilled my duty to my country.
Thank you, Professor. And before you go, sir, perhaps you would like to plug any of your work or your social media accounts. Where can people find you? Do you have anything else new coming up?
Yeah, I have a book stuck with Melbourne University Press. It's about how different ASEAN countries are resisting China's hegemony. I'm really tempted to call it 50 Shades of Hedging or resistance, but I'm still, medyo, the publishing industry is going through transition. So I hope that will come out, God willing. Let's pray for that na lalabas yung book na yan. Pinaghirapan ko yan. I'm also trying to work on a book on the Marcoses, the return of the Marcoses. And if the rise of the Marcoses, then the fall of Duterte. So essentially, a continuation of my book on the rise of Duterte. So siguro, kailangan ko umuwi. Agawit actually Ilocos. Now I have to go back and do some ground research and talk to people there in Ilocos. My people, right? And go across the countries. And please feel free to follow us. I have a little small, Spotify podcast, deep dive with Richard Heydarian, also on YouTube. Slowly building up myself there. So please, follow us there. And, once in a while, I throw in something different. A little bit fashion, minsan a little bit gym, yung mga ganon.
Of course.
I'm working on my progressive Tristan Tate response. Don't worry. That's
our producer loves that, Professor. Our producer loves that.
Right? Like, someone told me, reklamo kay Jordan Peterson or Andrew Tate or Huberman, whatever. Di gawa ka na sarili niya. Sabi ko, nga, no. Now, obviously, those are big guys and all given the hand. But yeah, I think there should be an effort. If you disagree with these guys, then come up with a better inspiration. Kasi alam ko marami sa ating mga kabataan, they're looking for people to look up to. Diba?
Yes.
Kung snob ka, hanggang, nandun ka lang sa circle mo, paano mo sila ma-inspire? So inspire by inspiration.
Get
and
out of the ivory towers.
Exactly. That's what we're doing. So thank you for your question on the, all of that and all. Maybe we'll do a jiu-jitsu or MMA vlog next time. Salamat, guys. I hope this is just the beginning of collaboration with you guys.
Yes,
as I said, I'm open to collaborate with anyone as long as my time and health and everything permits. Of course, things get crazy. So unlike other people, I don't compete with anyone. So let's do this hopefully more in the future. Yeah.
Yes, sir. And we'd like to thank our guest, Professor Richard Heydarian, who's been so generous with his time and energy, especially for a small podcast like that. He's such an inspiration. It's good to see his messaging reach even a local level. You see his messaging even being repeated in the comment section now in the Bardagulan there. This has been SITREP, the podcast on Philippine affairs and Philippine interests. This has been Ivan at Home. With me is Alex Inform PH hosting live from Manila. Tune in to us on x.com/SITREPPH or youtube.com/@SITREPPH. Professor, thank you so much. Philippines, thank you and good night. Mabuhay.